after football. And we've been fortunate enough to have Brandi Winans come in today to join us on the panel. And I actually asked John Hauser, and he said yes. So John's up here on the panel with us as well. And Dave's going to moderate a little bit, but I'm sure Dave's going to have a bit to talk about as well. The more I've gotten to know a lot of the football players and their families, the more I've realized that the game doesn't end when you step off the field. There's a lot of side pieces. You've got the impact of concussions. You've got the impact of no disability benefits and everything else affecting your families. Puts a lot of stress and strain in your family. And only in the recent years have we started to understand a little bit more about these impacts. And I think that that's why we decided to have this short discussion today, with a couple of folks about what it had as an effect on their families and to them directly. And hopefully by doing that, more people come forward and share the stuff. I'm just going to make it real brief. I'm just going to also tell you that we've got, right after this, around 11 o'clock, we'll break. Then at 11 o'clock, we'll have John Hogan come up, Attorney John Hogan, talking about some of the latest stuff on disability, maybe touch briefly anonymously in a few cases that he's been working on, that he's seen settled, and where he thinks a lot of the disability stuff's going. We'll break for lunch. When we come back at 2 o'clock, not 2:30 as I thought it was, I forgot, 2 o'clock, we'll have our discussion on the NFL Films litigation. And Ron Mix is going to come in and present first, talking about the settlement offer that the NFL has put on the table. Unfortunately, Dan Gustafson called in and said that they had a family emergency at the last minute. He can't make it, but I think that he did send his PowerPoint presentation to Ron, so Ron's going to go through that. We've also got attorney Mike Cerisi here to debate on the other side, or at least discuss from the other side about why they feel that the settlement offer is not good enough. And with him will be Fred Dreyer, and I think Dan Pastrini is here as well, so we may have Dan also interject with some comments. And then following that, we're going to end up rounding it off with a little bit more light stuff, talking about some of the playing conditions when you guys played in the old days. And we decided this year, instead of having it in a banquet hall, our dinner, we're going to have it down in the restaurant, Don Vito's. And unfortunately, they don't want us standing up in the restaurant telling her husband, Jeff Winans, passed away in December very suddenly. So Brandi just had a memorial service down in California, what was it, last week, a couple of weeks ago, and made it back from that. And she was still managed to be able to make it to our conference. So here's Brandi.
I'm not Brandi, but I just wanted to say a couple of words before we bring Brandi up. When players leave the game of football, the ones in the 70s and the 80s, maybe before that, even in the 90s, there really wasn't an exit strategy. Your name was just taken off your locker, and it's just, you didn't exist anymore, and you were considered a pariah, an outcast. And, one of the things that retired players have had to deal with, if you look at the divorce rate, the bankruptcy rate, it's not good. They said 80% of retired players end up divorced or bankrupt 2 years after they left the game. And it's frightening. And with all the injuries, in the past years, it's been an eye-opener. But what's bringing this to a head, in my opinion, are the concussions. Because once you injure your brain, it's a whole different story. I mean, that really is a life-altering change, and it just gets worse. And retired players have really had no outlet. So, and the wives are a lot of wives don't want to talk about what's happened because it's for a lot of reasons. What it's done to their families, the shame. They look at it as shame. There's no shame. But it's a heavy price players pay. And, I have a lot of respect for the wives because you know what? It's not an easy road. And so, I just want to thank Brandi and all the other wives. I've been married for 40 years. And you know what? Fortunately, I'm still married and I got a great wife. But you know what? It's not easy. And so I just want to say how much I appreciate all the wives do, because you know what? Without the wives, where would a lot of these players be? Because when you get brain damage, you know, it affects you cognitively, the way you process information, the decisions you make, the way you treat people. It's just mood changes. And then dementia comes in. You start forgetting things. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse. And you think everything's fine, but your wife, in most cases, doesn't understand it. Brandi will tell you how she didn't understand it. Unfortunately, my wife is a psychology major, and she told me 30 years ago, you know, Dave, hey, there's something wrong. You know, you need to do something. Well, 20 years later, that's when I started looking into it. So, you know, I just want to thank the wives, and I want to introduce Brandi and let Brandi tell her story, you know, because her story is similar to a lot of retired players. But it's nice that she's here to tell us her story. So, please come.
Thank you so much, and I am so excited to be here to be able to share my story and to be able to.
I'm glad you guys give me plenty.
That I've come to, and I want to thank Dave. I want to thank Robert and all the sponsors who continually are able to put these summits and conferences on, because together we are one, and the more that we can come together, and the more that we can get families back together, or the ones that are divorced, to get them to understand. My job today. Thanks. My job today is to tell you just a short summary of our story, and to tell you why I decided to write The Flip Side of Glory, and then what I hope to accomplish over the next few years, and I'll need your help on that one. First, I want to tell you a little bit about my man, Jeff Winans. I have dyslexia, and like Dave said, we just did his service a few weeks ago, so I want to make sure that my ADD doesn't kick in and I'm all over the place. So I'm going to use some of my notes, so bear with me. But I think Jeff was born to be a professional athlete. At his service a few weeks ago, we had several of his buds and coaches come and speak, and there wasn't one guy that said, I think Jeff was born to be a professional athlete. He was 6'5½", 290 pounds in his prime, defensive tackle, offensive guard, and he was an All-American at MJC, Modesto Junior College, and then he was brought over with scholarships to USC by John McKay. And during that time at USC, he became the second-round draft pick for the Buffalo Bills and played with O.J. and Joe D. and Joe Ferguson and Seymour and the Electric Company. He had some injuries there and was traded over to the Oakland Raiders for a short stint with John Madden. And at that time, Davis and McKay decided that they would send him to a place called Tampa Bay. And he ended up over with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which is where I met him. And we met in 1979. Both of us were kind of going through divorces, and we met at a bar at Molly McGuire's, which was a place in Clearwater that was owned by the McGuire brothers, who were previous friends of Jeff's at Buffalo. And I'm sure Joe D. has some stories on those McGuire brothers. But Jeff was the love of my life. He was a Greek god. If you were to look at him, the first time I met him, I walked into a bar and he was sitting at the bar by himself on a stool with a tank top on, muscles showing, beautiful tan, blue jeans, and this beautiful Greek curls and a small beard here and these piercing brown eyes that, for me, I just got lost in. My girlfriend introduced us, and his smile, if you've ever known Jeff, was infectious. He could walk into a room and draw attention from the perspective that he had a beautiful smile on his face, and when he laughed, everybody laughed. That was just Jeff. A few months after we met, Jeff got waived from the Tampa Bay Bucks and was picked up by the Oakland Raiders and ended up being part of Super Bowl 15. Prior to the actual game of Super Bowl 15, when they were playing the season of 1980, he was injured again. He had multiple injuries over his career, from severe back injuries, ankles, knees, torn ACLs, MCLs, broken fingers, broken toes, a lot of things that you guys all know about and continue to get on the field and play, like what we were talking about yesterday. Everybody ends up, the coaches will tell you to take a little smelling salts and get back on the field, or take you in the locker room and shoot your leg up and you're good to go. So y'all know exactly what I'm talking about. At camp in 1981, he went back in, and at that time, the year before, he'd been asked to waive his back, and this time they asked him to not only waive his back, but to waive his ankle. And he was already having multiple neck and severe headaches. During the off season, he spent most of his time on the floor with pillows under his knees, surviving pain and headaches. And he was starting to get a lot of numbness in his arms at that time, and he called me up on the phone and he said, they want me to sign a new contract. And I said, well, how do you feel about it? And he said, with a very long pause, he said, for the first time in my life, I'm afraid to go on the field. And I said, then maybe it's time to come home. But you have to make that decision. I can't make that decision for you. But whatever you do, I'm here. And the next day, I decided to make a cheese casserole for him. And I wasn't sure if I'd hear the garage door up, but I did. And it was the last time he ever played professional football. We decided at that time to file NFL disability. And in 1981 through 1983, we repeatedly filed. We repeatedly were denied, saying that he could do the quote that I heard so many times at the congressional hearings when I was there, is they could all do sedentary work. And we said, well, Doc, what does that mean? And they go, well, that means you could work 2 or 3 hours a day. And we went, yeah, well, that'll bring in the big bucks, won't it? So we kept getting turned down, and at one of the player owners board meetings, which at that time was 3 players and 3 owners, Vince Lombardi Jr., after I'd gotten the transcripts, had said, what was Jeff's real reason for leaving football? We can't seem to make a decision. Was it his ankle or was it his back? Well, duh, it was both. So Gene Upshaw at that time during the transcripts, who had just become head of the Players Union, said, let's end this, let's send him to arbitration. So they contacted us and we decided, Jeff is disabled, I've been the sole support of our family, someday we want to start a family, and let's do it, let's go to arbitration. So we went to arbitration. We ended up with Alan Page, who was with Lundquist and Venom at that time out of Minnesota. The Players Union had given us a guy out of Oakland, a guy by the name of Wayne Hooper, who didn't really know exactly what he was doing. I don't know why the NFL had even hired him. He hadn't even had us apply for the right kind of disability papers. And Alan came down, and we had Sam Cagle, a mediator, and in July of 1984, Sam Cagle said, Jeff is totally and permanently disabled. We thought it was kind of funny because Jeff had written Gene a letter because they had played together at Oakland and had become good buds, and Gene was going to fly in and testify on Jeff's behalf. Well, Gene stiffed him that day, and our attorney out of Oakland said, you know, we don't want to intimidate these guys, so I think you and Alan need to go by yourself. So Alan and Jeff walk in to the arbitrator, to the mediation, and the NFL brings in 6 attorneys. But Alan was brilliant, and we prevailed. And a few months later, we were told that Jeff Sam Cagle deemed Jeff totally and permanently disabled from football. And we were cheering. We thought, we've done it. We've done it. 4 months later, we were moving from one house to another. Now, granted, we hadn't even seen any of the money yet. We had applied for temporary disability, and Alan Page said, you need to apply for temporary and total and permanent at the same time. So we had to wait, they were telling us, through temporary line of duty until total and permanent could happen, which, if any of y'all know, line of duty that time was 60 months. So 4 months later, we're moving from one house to another. We had decided we were going to start trying to have a baby. I herniate my discs and on my job, so I'm laying up at home. Unexpected move. The house we were trying to buy fell through, and we were 3/4 moved into the house, and I used to do a lot of target shooting, and I had bought him a .357 Derringer. He had taken it out. Well, my job required me to travel a lot, and I was gone usually about 2 weeks out of the month. And I was dealing with a lot of things with Jeff at that time, with a lot of emotional distress and depression. But he grabbed the jeans out of the closet. He had borrowed 2 shells from a friend of his and loaded it unbeknownst to me, and didn't even know it was in the jeans, home by himself, and he grabbed the jeans out of the closet, got down into the foyer, and the gun fell and discharged. The armor piercing hit the knee, just below the right knee. The bone hit and took the leg out. He goes down and realizes that he's bleeding to death, and he calls 911. The reason I'm telling you this story about the gunshot accident is because I'm paralleling the differences of what happened after that with the NFL. Jeff wasn't expected to live, the tragedy of all of it. I wasn't sure when I got to the house that he hadn't tried to commit suicide, but we had been doing so well the last year and planning to have a baby. I knew that wasn't the case, and it wasn't. By the time he got to the hospital, he wasn't expected to make it. He'd pretty much bled out and everything was shutting down. Every year when you get deemed disabled from the NFL, as you know, you have to go to a neutral physician's physical. Well, the leg, he ended up in the hospital all of my pregnancy. The blessing was 3 days later I found out I was pregnant with Travis, our only son. So from a negative comes a positive. During the next year and a half, Jeff lived mostly in a hospital fighting infection from the gunshot accident, and it was time for him to go to his NFL physical. At that time I called Mickey Yaris and told her, and of course it was on all the newspapers. At the time of the accident, I'm going to regress 1 minute, we had, after Jeff was not able to get, Al Davis decided during that season of Super Bowl 15 that Jeff was not entitled to a Super Bowl ring. So we had filed a $12.5 million lawsuit with the NFL and the Oakland Raiders. And when Jeff was in ICU, not expected to live, 2 days after the accident, a phone call came through that ICU nurse took from Al Davis, asking him that he was sorry about his accident, but if he would waive the 12 and drop the $12.5 million lawsuit, he would get his Super Bowl ring. That ring meant that much to him.
That's Al Davis.
We dropped the lawsuit. We didn't get the ring. We had to hire an attorney, and at that time they became the LA Raiders. We had to hire an attorney out of Oakland. The first ring, it took almost 2 years to end up getting the ring. But we ended up getting it. We had an attorney fly down and get it, and they claimed that the first one got lost in the mail and all kinds of hoopla. So, you know, you never know what you're going to face. And meanwhile, we're facing all these other injuries, and the NFL now says, well, either he goes to the neutral physician or we're going to pull your pension. Our pension at that time was $870 a month, which was what temporary line of duty was, even though we had been deemed years before that he was getting total and permanent, I think was around $8,000 or $9,000 a month at that time. So we went through all of that. Years later, 2 years later, 1986, I kept reapplying when Jeff was finally able to get out of a hospital bed and go to a neutral physician. We were sent to Dr. John Becker up in Northern California, and Dr. Becker at that time also said that Jeff had degenerative disc disease, multiple football injuries, qualified over 80%, but could do sedentary work. So at this point in time, I've got a young son. My company decides they're not paying any more medical bills. The bills were piling up to a point where creditors weren't working with us, and we filed bankruptcy. That was one of the hardest things I ever had to do, but it was also one of the biggest blessings because we had millions of dollars of medical bills. And because of the leg injury, the back and everything else was deteriorating as well. In 1988, I called Myrna Logston. I'd lost 25 pounds. I said, Myrna, you've got to help. I don't know what to do. She said, call me at this number later. It was like Watergate. I call her at a payphone that night, and I'm in tears, and I said, Myrna, this isn't right. We won arbitration. Why are they doing this? And she said, Brandi, I can't tell you anything, but I can tell you this. She said, there's been 7 players ever deemed disability. She said, the only way I've ever seen it happen is that you end up going back to the same neutral physician that you saw before. So she said, this conversation never happened. I said, it never happened. So the next day I called the benefit department and I said, you know, Jeff keeps deteriorating. Can we go back and see Dr. John Becker? And they said, yeah. I was like, okay. So we went and saw Dr. John Becker. Dr. John Becker at that time hadn't seen Jeff for 2 years, saw that his back and body had completely deteriorated more and said, yes, Jeff is now totally and permanently disabled from football. We thought, okay. They can't deny us now. They can't. We reapply. They come back in 1989. We had just moved back to Florida and stated that Jeff, because of the gunshot accident, that he was disabled but not from football, and they gave us non-football related injuries back to the $870 a month with $100 for Travis, and at that time we had no fight. In 1992, Jeff decided he was going to get back into the grid of things, and during the time we had moved there with he ended up having 2 amputations on his leg and a BK below the knee. The prosthetic company that he worked with, St. Pete Limb and Brace, had started asking him if he would come in and talk to support groups. He met a nurse at All Children's, and he would go in and talk to terminally ill and severely injured people at All Children's and Bayfront. And at that point in time, he started finding his niche. He started getting out of his major depression, and he said, you know what? If I can keep on my feet during the day and take my meds at night, he said, I want to start a foundation. I want to be able to help kids and families. And so in '92, he started Day for Our Children, which is still in existence today. I'm continuing to run it. We didn't know how to raise funds, but we knew how to play golf. Well, at least Jeff did. I was the straggler, but he was very good at pretty much everything he ever picked up, from golf to football to baseball to whatever. And he went to Outback. He went to GTE Wireless, he went to Continental, and for the first year they all kind of watched us, and we would either put on celebrity softball events or celebrity golf events. He worked very diligently, and we started working with a lot of other charities and showing them how to raise funds, doing golf tournaments. He was the first guy in our Tampa Bay area to put together sports memorabilia auctions and working diligently to get all of his buds to sign stuff. And in '96, he became president of the NFL alumni there. Over the years, I started noticing a lot of changes. We went through a lot of depression. We went through outbursts of anger and at times, but in 2002, he decided that he couldn't do the foundation anymore. It was just too much on him. And he was deteriorating not only physically, but emotionally. And I didn't understand it. He also had become addicted to prescription drug medication, and the doctors continued to give it to him, and I was the bad guy because I was the tattletale who was always calling the doctors, being very upset with them because they were giving him 100 milligrams of Duragesic patches, which is 80 times more potent than morphine. He was taking those patches every 2 days. They were giving him 120 Soma, 10 mils, 60 Valium, 60 Percodan for breakthrough, and of course he was smoking pot and anything else he could get his hands on. After he stopped doing the foundation, it wasn't just an evening event, it was a 24-hour event, and he realized he needed help. And one day he called me from work and he said, I made an appointment to see a psychiatrist. I know if I don't, our marriage is done. And I said, okay. I was real proud of him. He saw a forensic psychiatrist who then diagnosed him with manic depression, bipolar, and borderline personality disorder. And they put him on lithium, and they put him on Wellbutrin XL, and she didn't know that he was also combining all the other meds from the other doctors. Of course, he got really good at looking you in the face and lying. Oh no, everybody knows everything. Really? So one day I ended up calling one of his doctors, and we ended up having a nightmare from hell event, and then I became the bad guy, and the anger management and the lies and I wasn't his favorite person anymore. It escalated until 2005. We separated the end of 2005. I had no idea. I thought Jeff had prescription drug addiction. I thought that was the demise. I knew he had physical injuries. I knew all that. But I could not compete with the medication. I could not compete with the drugs, and I could not compete with the outburst of anger and the breaking things and throwing things and walking around on eggshells. Our son and I ended up walking around on eggshells, but yet we both loved him. He will always be the love of my life, and Travis worshiped him, and knowing everything that his father had been through made him love his father even more. He was also a star athlete playing basketball, and then eventually came out to California playing football. At that point in time, I decided, for years I'd been trying to get Jeff to write The Flip Side of Glory. We had had a newspaper article done when we lived in Modesto, and the title from the reporter was The Flip Side of Glory, Jeff Winans. And I had told him for years, honey, you need to write this book, because after he stopped doing the foundation, I bought him a laptop. I said, you know, this will give you something to do, and you can get all this stuff vented. And he would try really, really hard, and he couldn't do it. He ended up throwing the laptop against the wall one night and said, forget it, you know, I'm done. I'm done. I can't do this. I don't want to live anymore. And through these bouts, it ended with separation. I started deciding I had the courage then, because I didn't have the courage to do it before. And I'm stating that to you wives and men. I didn't have the courage to do it before because we were the protectors of our family. We wanted to give our husbands dignity when they walked out the door. We kept everything when the shoulder pads and the helmets come off. We kept it behind closed doors. We maybe talked to a few of our girlfriends who thought we were crazy for staying with our men. And the hardest part of what would I do if I left, what would happen to Jeff? What would happen to him? If something happened to him, I couldn't stand the thought that maybe I had been the cause of that. And you go through all these things, trying to protect them and trying to get them to get help. Jeff's medication had lasted 1.5 years, and then it escalated worse. And one night he tried to kill me in the car. And then it kept getting worse and worse, and I started becoming afraid of him. In 2007, I'm channel surfing at my girlfriend's house in May, and I don't have HBO at my house. I can't afford it. I'm channel surfing, and I run across an HBO special of Bryant Gumbel's Real Sports, and he's talking to a young man named Chris Nowinski. And Chris is talking about a book that he wrote called Head Games. And I know God took me there that night. I'm listening to Chris, and I'm hearing every symptom and sign of Jeff. and he's listing them, and the tears are rolling down my face, and I get this god-awful knot in my stomach, and I went, oh my God. That's Jeff, that's Jeff, that's Jeff, that's Jeff, that's Jeff. And the Holy Spirit came all over me, and I thought, was that the demise of my marriage? Was it prescription drugs? Was it a combination? And I said, God, if I'm supposed to get involved in this, give me a sign. I went on the internet that night. I couldn't get through to HBO Real Sports to find Chris. He had told the story of playing football for 4 years at Harvard and didn't go to the pros but ended up with WWE as Chris Harvard. So I found him, and I also found the company that he was working for, and I Googled him, wrote him an email, and within 24 hours, Chris emailed me back. We set a time for a conference call the following Monday. This was like a Saturday night. That morning, I'm watching Good Morning America, and I see Joe D. and Ditka, and they're talking about the congressional hearings coming up in June. And up until that time, I thought the flip side of glory was Jeff and the Jeff and Brandi Winans story. I had no idea that there was going to be congressional hearings about pre-93ers dealing with pensions, dealing with disability issues. And I thought, my God, we have fought all these years over this. And I'm going to back up 1 minute. In 93, the collective bargaining came out, and in 95, I saw the benefit book, and I reapplied then for the degenerative disc category, which took another 2.5 years for us to get. So at that point, 1,600, 3,250, 4,000 looked a lot better than 1,600, but they put us through the ringer for another 2.5 years in order to get it. Going back to the Chris Nowinski situation, I knew then I was going to the congressional hearings. He told me to contact Linda Sanchez's office, and I said, I need to give written testimony on what the families and the spouses go through, what the kids and the families are going through. I said, nobody talks about that. And he said, you've got to come. I went up to the DICA hearings, the press conference that morning before the hearings, and I was in absolute shock. I was meeting Brian and Autumn DeMarco. I was meeting Gina and Brent Boyd. I was meeting Sandy Unitas. I was meeting several other wives. I sat with Brian's wife, Autumn, and I sat with Gina Boyd as we squeezed each other's hands. The tears ran down our face as Garrett Webster, Brian DeMarco got up talking about his injuries, trying to fight for disability. Garrett Webster got up and talked about his dad, Mike Webster, and how it was so bad for his dad because none of them could, Jeff always had trouble sleeping, that Mike used to have Garrett taser him unconscious so he could sleep. And the stories that I heard that day made me realize that I needed to go home and I needed to rewrite this whole book because it was about all of us. It was about everybody going through the same thing we were going through, and that unless we come together, there will be no changes. And I went back and rewrote the whole book, and I sent it to Jeff. At that time, we had always stayed friends. We talked every week almost. Our son had made the move out to stay with him for a few years, and so I felt like there was a safe haven there for him until he moved back in 2010. Jeff got him in with some coaches at a junior college there, and Travis also tried his hand at playing football and wanted to follow in his dad's footsteps, although the basketball star in him, he didn't know how to fall or anything else. He got several injuries and realized that it wasn't his forte. He's now a personal trainer. In the end, I sent Jeff a manuscript, and I said, I'm not going to publish this without your permission. I want you to read it, and I want you to really read it. He read the book. He called me on the phone. I read the script. I said, Ann? And then he got real long-winded, and he started tears, and he said, the first half of the book was so emotional, all I did was cry. And then I said, and the second half? I'm not happy about it. I don't like it. It doesn't make me look very good. And I said, all right. Now, at that time, the book was almost 400 pages. I had a lot to vent too. But it wasn't about bashing somebody. That was the whole point of the book. It was about telling a story of behavior and progression over a period of time, and especially showing the last 10 years we were together, how deteriorated the brain had gotten and his behavior had gotten. So he sent me back. I said, well, just scratch out what you don't want and send it back. So he sent me back the book, and almost the whole half was, you know, and you could see the anger, and you could see all this stuff going on. He was, so I said, all right. I took 100 pages out of the book, and I said, all right, I'm going to take just a little bit, and I'm going to add some things into a few chapters so that we have to show it, but I said, I'm going to send it back to you. So I sent it back to him, and he reread it for the second time, and he said, I didn't understand where you were coming from the first time because I was anxious, and I just knew you were just going to bash the hell out of me. But he said, I read it this time, and he said, I don't like a few of those last chapters you put in, but he said, I'll tell you what, if it'll help one family, then let's do it. And in 2010, he got rehab, and we started making arrangements to get back together. And in 2012, we made a decision. He was moving back to Florida and going to help our son open a high-performance athletic facility. He was very excited, and I went out to spend 2 weeks in October with him, and we decided to make a surprise with our son, who was flying back out with his girlfriend the end of February. We were going to have them surprise him and have him stand up for us and get remarried. As a family, as people, we have to be able to not have any shame about where we are. Now, Dave was mentioning earlier about shame, and Heidi, his wife, I have to give her a round of applause too, because Dave, we've known Dave since the Buck days, and Jeff played with him in with the Raiders. The wives, I really want to reach out to you, because what I want to accomplish next is I want to put a national directory together. I want to put an 800 number together, a support group and directory that we can do nationwide, that if somebody needs help, they can pick up a phone, they can get immediate help, they can physically, emotionally talk to somebody on that phone immediately. It's not going to happen overnight, but the more we come together as a family, the more that we can get the word out. Look where we've come already since 2007. Yes, we have a lot more to do, but we can't do it by ourselves. And I want to reach out to the wives, because every one of you in this room has a story to tell, men and women. But the women are the infrastructure of the family. And, you know, we're wired. You guys have little boxes. We have wires. There's a funny story that I saw about men's brains and women's brains, but we are built different. We are different. And we're here to help, not control your life, not do all these things that, you know, you feel like we're trying to take over your life. That's not the point. It's because we love you, and we care about you, and we want only the best for you. And if I can bring any more families back together the way mine came back together, and help educate what concussions and brain and TBI and chronic traumatic encephalopathy does to the brain, I think I can bring a lot more families back together. Even if they don't remarry, they can come back together for the sake of their children and for the understanding of knowing that it wasn't their husband doing that. It was a brain racing. It was a progressive brain disease and injury that was created, and I think that's the message that we have to get out. And I thank you for allowing me to be here, and I'll be happy to answer any questions after John gets up. Thank you.
I hope everybody will get a chance to get a copy of Brandi's book. It's going to be a great read. With that, we've got John Hauser up here, and many of you know that John played a lot of years in the NFL many years back, and I'll tell a quick, short little story. We had our banquet last year at our last conference, and Conrad Dobler managed to make it out to that last one. And I remember we were sitting around the table, and Conrad's asking us questions, of course, the way he usually does. And he asked John and his wife, how long have you guys been married? I think John at the time said 53, almost 54 years. And Dobler looks over at them and says, and just how's that been working out? So with that, John just told me they're coming up on their 55th anniversary. And John's going to talk about how they've managed to, how these guys have managed to stay together. How's that been working out?
Let's start off here. How many husband and wives are here right now? Husband and wife. How long you been married? 44? 44. Husband and wives over here? Sandusky.
It will be 54 in August.
54? From my neighborhood. 24. Pikers. Oh, okay. That's great. That's great.
Yeah, Bob Seaman?
Oh, Seager? Yes, sir. 45. Good for you, Bob. Good for you, Bob. All right. It's been a bed of roses, hasn't it, Bob? All the time, okay? I can tell you this right now, that you have to know a little bit of our background, my wife and mine, is that I was born and raised in Oklahoma. My mother died when I was 12. My dad tried to raise me and my sister. He decided to get married again, and that didn't work out, and he got married again. That didn't work out. They got married. I asked his dad, I said, Dad, you've been married 5 times. How come you got married so often? He says, I thought I'd keep doing it till I got it right. Okay, so that's kind of a family background. But my dad did one thing for me, and that he enrolled me into a wonderful school called the Boys Republic in Chino, California. Boys Republic was organized and established in 1907 by a lady by the name of Margaret Fowler. Enough for that, but you've heard of Father Flanagan's Boys Town? They have a boy government there. Father Flanagan... Well, I need to raise this thing here. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyhow, they copied their boy government after the Boys Republic. And I got my good schooling and learned the gridiron at the Boys Republic, and I got a scholarship to the University of Redlands, and that's where I met my wife, future wife. What's this? All right, is that better? Fast forward is that my coaches at the University of Redlands asked the Dallas Cowboys if they were interested in having a local boy tryout. You see, the Los Angeles Rams, had their summer training camp at the University of Redlands. So the Rams said, oh, well, we might as well, let's make the local college happy and take on their boy here, and we need cannon fodder anyway. So anyhow, I was a walk-on free agent, and I made it. And from there, the next year, during that time, my wife, Allison, and I had a long-distance romance, you might say. And in September the 28th, 1958, I had a first league football game in the Coliseum with the Cleveland Browns. In the closing seconds of the game, we were tied 27-27, and Otto Graham marched them down the field and got to the 20-yard line enter Lou the Toe Groza, and that was the end of the game, 30-27. I run off the field. You're trying to say, well, what's the significance of this? Run off the field, took a shower real fast, got in a cab, went to the LAX, Los Angeles airport, met my wife, my future wife, and her father and her mother, and he took her hand and laid it in my hand, and he said, take care of her. And then he looked at her and he says, honey, you can come home anytime you want to visit. That's the truth. I'll never forget that. Because that made an impact on me. And we got on the airplane, we flew to Las Vegas. We were the guests of Abe Schiller, the general manager of the Flamingo Hotel. He got the JP to come there and meet us in the presidential suite. We got married there. And so everybody says, oh my gosh, you didn't get married in the church, and you just got married by justice of the peace. And it's kind of rather sudden. It's not going to last. That's what they said 55 years ago. Now, I got to tell you something. One of the smartest things I ever did, because I was traveling, and then after football, I got into sales and traveling. The smartest thing I ever did is I turned all the bank accounts and everything over to my wife. Because if anything ever happened to me on the road, she'd know where things were, you know, the insurance policies and the bank and stuff like that. She was an only child. I have a sister, and I had a very stable family environment until my mother died. And that was our background. And I can tell you this, that one of the secrets to the longevity of our marriage is I learned how to say a very two-word phrase very effectively. Yes, dear. And how high did you say want me to jump? And some people say, well, a marriage is a 50-50 proposition. 30-70. If that much. And because I was on the road for so much, she gave me a great deal of support. One of the things that I had to do was reinvent myself when I finally decided to retire from professional football. And this is where my wife, again, played an important part. And that is, I said, honey, what am I going to do now? All I know how to do is play football. She says, well, we're going to go to the library. What are we going to do at the library? We're going to go check out a couple of books on how to write a resume. I got to tell you something. One of the things that we're talking about, the hotline to help young people, one of the things I think that we can look at also is that if we ever get our act together and we decide to provide these services to retired guys, is the football players that are finishing their professional career, and they're going to sit back and say, honey, what am I going to do now? And we ought to be able to design a program to help them to make that transition. And that's the way we're going to get more support for our organization here, I think. And to show them there's certain ways that you have to, things that you have to do to get your act together for writing a resume, presenting yourself as professionally as possible to a interviewer, a job interviewer, and how to put down on paper your skills and abilities and how it might apply to a job. And I went to work for a major corporation. And I want to tell you something. Corporation life is Very interesting, very interesting. The company was international. It's Owens Corning Fiberglass Corporation. And I was there for 17 years. And I went from a dog face, a line salesman, all the way up to a branch and district manager. And started out as a line salesman in Los Angeles. I won the Sales Builders Club 3 times in 5 years. And that was a little honor that they give people, the top 5% in the company as for field sales. From there, they said, well, we have a little problem up in Denver. We're just not making the sales that we think we need, so we'd like to send you up there. So they sent me up there, and the first, I found out that they were selling only $920,000 worth of fiberglass building products. And I just put my nose to the grindstone and started hitting the bricks. And 9 years later, we built that branch from $920,000 with one man to 5 salesmen, 3 administrative help, to $46.3 million. So that was a pretty good increase, and at the same time, won the highest honor in the company, which was Branch Manager of the Year and Branch of the Year. And all this I couldn't have done by myself. My wife is at home taking care of the children and taking care of the home and wondering if I'm all right on the road. And when I finally got some sales support, other salesmen, I didn't have to spend that much time. But then I had become more involved in construction organizations like the Home Builders Association and the architectural CRA. I forget the acronym, what they call it now, but I was very much involved in that. And then after 17 years, a headhunter got me, and I went to work for another company, and my wife was very supportive of that too, and I started working for Brooks Products, and that was all right. The guy that helped me was a former 49er, and we hit it off. And he was also a private pilot. So one weekend, him and his wife was going to spend a nice weekend at Lake Tahoe, and in flying into that airport up there at the Tahoe is surrounded by mountains. They got hit by a wind shear and blew into a mountainside. And his partner and I didn't get along very well. So that was the end of that career after a brief 5 years. So after that, I decided to retire permanently. And I went incognito. I used my background in building products, and I went to work for a home improvement center. And I became the manager of the lumber and building materials department. And was basically a 9-to-5 guy, and went home to my house in Solvang and just have a great life right now. And I couldn't do it without the support of my wife, Mary Allison, and I wish she was here right now. She'd probably be throwing something at me. And right now, that's about it, I have to say. I'm sorry to say that, Brandi, you've really had a tough one. I've had a great one. And that's the contrasting stories that we've got to say.
I don't look at it as a tough one because Jeff was the love of my life, and I don't look at it as a caretaker, although for a lot of our relationship I was. But I look at it as a part of my life and a wonderful adventure. I have no regrets that I ever married Jeff. I have no regrets that I have a beautiful son, my greatest blessing, and was Jeff's greatest blessing. And you know, life happens, and you have to take a a positive out of every negative. I do life and relationship coaching now and behavior assessments, and part of that support group that John was just talking about would be that type of support in helping athletes transition and helping you to get back on your feet and helping you to regain that confidence level that you had when you walked out on that field. Because when the game is over, the game of life is not over. Your life is always just beginning. Every day is a new day to start over and start fresh. But it's up to you to make that kind of choice and decision. And each and every one of you can. We're all going to have bad days. That's just life. But you take those bad days into good days, and you always look for out of that bad day, you know. And that work group, Jerry and I were just talking just before I got up here as well, and he's doing some transitioning too. So
you have to stay, never. You have to have the catalyst never to give up, because as long as you give up, they win. And they know who I am there. Marion Fleming, Sarah Gaunt, Mickey Yaris, they all know who I am. They all know who Jeff was. They didn't like us. That's understandable.
If I could interject just for a second, I was going to talk about Dave's case. And Dave ended up fighting these guys over the years. And what was it? We started the blog, I think, five and a half years ago. And I told Dave I wouldn't be surprised if these guys try to find some way to buy you off or try to make you push you back. And literally, but what was it, a year and a half after we started the blog, all of a sudden Gene Upshaw announced that they were putting out this fantastic new program that if you qualify for Social Security disability, you should automatically qualify for the Bird Belt disability plan. So Dave went ahead and applied for it. They had certain criteria. You couldn't be 55, was that right? And there were a couple of other things. And it fit Dave to a T. I mean, you could have made it more perfect. And it was made basically for Dave Pear. What was also interesting, though, was that I think there were two other players that fit that category. One was Dave Hum, because he wasn't quite 55 yet. And I think there was another player who didn't apply. Dave Hum applied, he got it. And literally a month or two later, Dave gets an authorization. And they all say, congratulations, you now have, was it partial? Is it partial?
It's football inactive.
Football inactive.
The inactive means you didn't get hurt playing football, and the means you did it. There's a huge pay difference.
Yeah. So anyway, what happened though was Dave was expecting, gee, I got turned down back in '94, it should be retroactive. Well, what we didn't know was that apparently Gene Upshaw and Harold Henderson from the NFL had done a little side deal in the back and signed a little extra note that said, you can't get retroactive on this. So I think Dave got a check for 3 months worth of payments. We sat down, we did the math, and each check was $300 and something short. And we went, what the heck is this $300 and something a month? So Dave ended up calling that, was it Mickey Yaris Davis, and said, why are you taking $300 and something a month off my check? And she said, you don't remember? Way back when you signed this policy so that your spouse, Heidi, could get 100% of your benefits after you died. So we started blogging about it in Dave's post, and we said, well, if it's a policy, where's a copy of the policy? We kept bugging them and asking them, where's the policy? You do know when you have an insurance policy, you have to send someone a copy. That's the way it works. We ended up getting nothing from the NFL or the Bird Belt plan or the NFLPA. Nobody would help us. We ultimately called and wrote to the insurance commissioner of Washington State, New York, Florida, I don't know how many states. Nobody knew what the hell's going on. And to this day, Dave still has no copy of the so-called insurance policy to guarantee that his wife was going to get his full benefits. If we had inquired and known that this was an insurance policy for her benefits after he died, Heidi would never have known about it. So when Dave passed away, she would get this benefit. And that's going on with all the spouses. Check what you're getting for your benefits. See if you signed off on it. See if they've actually given you this benefit. Make sure your spouse knows about it. Make sure it's in your will. I'm just kind of cautioning everybody to read everything you get. And that's a true story.
And furthermore, if indeed you do have it, have them put it in writing. Because if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. If they say something, so, you know, as many as insurance commissioners that we talked to, I think there was 11 of them, they finally got fed up with it and they put something in writing saying what it was, but there is no policy. So, but I just want to say that John Hogan is going to be up next, and he's going to go in and cover disabilities, pensions, and some of the cases that I think you'll find very interesting. And
The pre-93ers, are the ones who are hurting. The new rules and collective bargaining agreements today are so much better because they have much better benefits. They have 5 years medical. They've got a annuity program. They are doing so much more. In all honesty, I think it's because of us fighting, and now they're making things better. But our goal is to make it better for all of us, especially the pre-93ers. And I'll keep fighting this as an advocate until my last breath.
and John Hogan can talk more on it. 5 years medical after football isn't enough medical, because a lot of these problems really kick in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, and they got this 15-year rule that John will talk about, where if you become disabled 15 years after you're finished playing, basically you don't qualify for much. So it was crafted very well by the new law group, and it's crafted to protect the planet, not you. So you need to be aware of that. So
I can tell you this right now, you can't rely on the NFL again. I'm sorry, Mr. Roberts, but I just have one rule with them: you can't trust them.
And he's just saying that based on the track record.
Yeah.
So,
Any other questions for me?
well, you know what? Oh, go ahead. Back to you.
I just wanted to mention, I'm Tim Spidell. I've spoken to a great many of you. I'm here working with Academy Award-winning director Cynthia Wade, and we're doing a film about the wives of the NFL, about life after the parade has gone on, and it's not an expose of the NFL. It's working from the inside out to tell the stories of the women working with their families, their men, to keep things together. And I'd appreciate anyone who would like to talk to me. I've spoken with great length to Brandi. She's wonderful, and to several other people there have been terrific. He's laughing because he was amazing to talk to. He told us some really wonderful stories. So I'm going to be here after this panel so that anyone can speak. I really appreciate it. It's a very sincere effort. It's a very serious film. Our executive producer is Jeff Winans, who was a former Dallas Cowboy, and we're in this for the long haul. So thank you very much, and thank you so much for having me. It's been an amazing few days.
Thanks, Tim.
I just also want to challenge the wives one last thing. I'd like you to learn as much as you possibly can about your husband's injuries, about brain concussions. I challenge you to do that, because you also need to educate your children about it so that they understand. Doesn't matter what age that they are, they're going to, children are video recorders with legs. They see everything, even when you don't think they see it, and they internalize it. And so please educate yourselves. And again, I'm here if you need me. Thank you.
I would just like to say that this conference yesterday and today, it's all going to be, it's all being recorded, it'll all be on the blog, so so you can see what all the lawyers have to say.
Boom 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 boom.